Our mom has the same tattoo as you. The three little girls said it so casually that nobody else in the grocery store paid attention. But the color drained from Ethan Brooks's face. For a brief second, the 40-year-old maintenance worker looked as if the world had tilted beneath his feet. Then the moment passed. A customer bumped a shopping cart nearby. A cashier called for assistance. Life moved on. Yet Ethan stood frozen beside a display of cereal boxes, staring at the identical triplets in front of him. Most people in the store would have assumed he was exactly what he appeared to be, a tired single father in worn work boots and a faded work jacket. The assistant manager certainly thought so. Earlier that morning, Ethan had applied for a vacant facilities supervisor position at the store. The manager barely glanced at his resume before handing it back. "We are looking for someone with stronger qualifications," he had said. Ethan had simply nodded and thanked him. No argument. No complaint. Quiet dignity had become a habit long ago. Now the three girls watched him expectantly. They could not have been older than 8. "What tattoo?" Ethan asked gently. One of the girls pointed to the small mark partially visible beneath his sleeve. It was a simple design near his wrist, something he rarely discussed. "Our mom has that exact same one," she said. Ethan felt a chill despite the warm afternoon. Across the parking lot outside, his aging pickup truck sat beneath a row of fluttering American flags. For years, that tattoo had been tied to a chapter of his life he believed was permanently closed. "Where is your mother?" he asked carefully. The girls exchanged glances. "Working. She's always working," another added. Before Ethan could ask another question, a woman hurried toward them from another aisle. "Girls, please stop bothering people." Her tone carried embarrassment more than anger. The triplets immediately fell quiet. The woman offered Ethan an apologetic smile. "I am sorry." They talked to everyone. Ethan nodded politely. Then he noticed something. The woman was not their mother. She was older. A grandmother, perhaps. "No problem," Ethan replied. The girls looked disappointed as they were guided away. One of them turned back. "Tell him about the tattoo," she called. The older woman quickly ushered them toward the checkout lanes. Ethan stood motionless. Questions pressed against memories he had spent years avoiding. His phone buzzed. The screen displayed a reminder from his son's middle school. Parent meeting at 4:30 p.m. Reality returned. Ethan pushed the cart toward checkout. Responsibility came first. It always had. An hour later, he was sitting in a school hallway waiting outside a classroom. Parents scrolled through phones. Teachers moved between offices. Ethan reviewed paperwork while helping his 13-year-old son, Noah, study for a science competition. The boy frowned at a complicated problem. Ethan glanced at the page and quietly sketched a solution in less than a minute. Noah smiled. "You always make this stuff look easy." Ethan shrugged. "Only because somebody once taught me the hard way." He never elaborated. He rarely did. The school principal walked past and paused. "Mr. Brooks, I heard about the supervisor position at the grocery store." Ethan looked up. "Word travels fast. You deserved a fair chance." Ethan offered a small smile. Life is not always fair. There was no bitterness in his voice, only experience. That evening, after stopping by the mailbox and sorting through utility bills at home, Ethan found himself staring out the kitchen window. The image of the triplets would not leave his mind. Neither would the tattoo. Then, just before sunset, something caught his eye. A folded flyer had slipped from one of the envelopes. It advertised a local charity fundraiser scheduled for the weekend. At the bottom was a photograph of the event organizer. Ethan's breath stopped. The woman in the picture had the same tattoo on her wrist. And for the first time in many years, he recognized a face he thought he would never see again. For several minutes after finding the flyer, Ethan simply stood at the kitchen counter staring at the photograph. The woman looked older than he remembered, but there was no mistaking her face. Claire Hartwell. 10 years ago, she had vanished from his life without warning. Ethan folded the flyer carefully and slipped it into a drawer before Noah returned from upstairs. Some memories had a way of reopening old wounds when least expected. The next morning began the way most mornings did. Before sunrise, Ethan was already outside, loading tools into his pickup truck. The air carried the smell of fresh-cut grass from neighboring yards. A newspaper rested beside the mailbox at the edge of the driveway. Inside the house, Noah hurried through breakfast while Ethan packed an extra sandwich in his son's lunch bag. The refrigerator door displayed overdue utility bills held in place by magnets. Money was often tight. Complaints were not part of the routine. "You have a science meeting after school," Ethan reminded him. Noah nodded. "Will you be there?" Ethan smiled. "Would not miss it." The answer came without hesitation. At work, Ethan spent the morning repairing heating units at a retirement community. One system had been declared beyond repair by another contractor. Residents had already been told replacement equipment would cost thousands of dollars. Ethan quietly examined the wiring and control board. 40 minutes later, warm air flowed through the vent again. The property manager stared in disbelief. "How did you figure that out?" Ethan simply shrugged. The problem was smaller than it looked. It was the kind of answer that frustrated people. He never advertised what he knew. He just solved problems and moved on. By noon, he was eating a quick lunch alone in a small diner near the highway. Construction workers filled nearby booths. Waitresses moved between tables carrying coffee pots. Ethan unfolded the fundraiser flyer again. Claire's photograph stared back at him. Beneath, it was a description of a charitable foundation supporting single mothers and children. That detail surprised him. The Claire he remembered had always wanted to help people. His phone buzzed before he could think further. Noah's school was calling. 20 minutes later, Ethan was walking through a crowded school hallway. A teacher met him near the office. "Nothing serious," she said quickly. One of the science competition displays collapsed. Ethan found Noah looking discouraged beside a pile of damaged materials. Several students were already leaving. The judging event was scheduled for the next day. Without wasting time, Ethan rolled up his sleeves and got to work. Broken supports became usable again. Damaged wiring was reorganized. Within an hour, the project stood stronger than before. Noah watched with admiration. "You could probably build this from scratch." Ethan smiled faintly. "Everybody knows something useful." A nearby teacher overheard the exchange. She had spent months assuming Ethan was simply another maintenance worker struggling to get by. Now she looked at him differently. Not because he bragged, because results were difficult to ignore. That evening, Ethan parked outside a church parking lot where volunteers were preparing for the fundraiser advertised on the flyer. He told himself he was only there to learn more about the event. Nothing else. The parking lot glowed beneath strings of temporary lights. Families carried donation boxes toward folding tables. Then Ethan saw something that stopped him cold. Standing near the entrance were the same 3 Triplet girls from the grocery store. And beside them, speaking with volunteers, stood Claire Hartwell herself. She had not seen him yet, but one of the girls suddenly looked up, pointed across the parking lot, and smiled. The little girl pointed across the church parking lot with complete certainty. "That is him," she announced. Her 2 sisters turned at the same time. Claire followed their gaze. For a moment, neither she nor Ethan moved. The sounds of volunteers unloading donation boxes seemed to fade beneath the hum of the overhead lights. 10 years disappeared in a single heartbeat. Claire looked stunned. Ethan looked as though he had forgotten how to breathe. "Ethan," she said quietly. He nodded once. "Hello, Claire." Before either of them could say more, a volunteer rushed toward the entrance carrying a stack of folding chairs. One slipped from his grasp and crashed into a display table. Several framed photographs tumbled toward the concrete. Ethan reacted instantly. He crossed the distance and caught 2 of them before they hit the ground. Another frame slid toward one of the triplets. Ethan stepped between her and the falling glass without hesitation. Within seconds, the situation was under control. "Everybody okay?" he asked. The volunteers nodded. Claire watched the entire thing. Not the speed of his reaction, the calmness, the instinct to protect others before thinking about himself. It was a small moment, yet something about it stayed with her. As volunteers reorganized the display, Ethan quietly helped reset tables and reconnect a portable lighting unit that had lost power during the commotion. Nobody asked him to. He simply noticed the problem and solved it. "You always did that," Claire said as they worked. Ethan glanced up. "Did what?" Fix things nobody else notices. He offered a faint smile, but said nothing. Nearby, the triplets chased each other around a donation booth while families arrived from across town. Pickup trucks and family SUVs filled the church parking lot. The fundraiser was growing busier by the minute. Claire finally introduced the girls properly. Emma, Lily, and Sophie. They greeted Ethan as if they had known him forever. Something about their warmth caught him off guard. "You remember my tattoo?" he said. Emma nodded proudly. "Mom has the same one." Claire instinctively touched the small tattoo near her wrist. Ethan noticed the gesture. "So, did she?" Neither mentioned it. Not yet. As the evening continued, a new problem emerged. One of the event coordinators became distressed after discovering the sound system had failed. The keynote speaker was arriving in less than an hour. Multiple volunteers attempted repairs. Nothing worked. Claire looked increasingly worried. Donations from the event would fund programs for dozens of struggling families. Without amplification, much of the evening would collapse into confusion. Ethan crouched beside the equipment. He studied the wiring for less than a minute. Then he opened a maintenance panel and adjusted several connections. Moments later, music flowed through every speaker in the building. Applause broke out around him. "How did you know that?" Claire asked. Ethan wiped dust from his hands. "I have worked on worse." It was another answer that explained nothing. Yet Claire noticed something important. This was not luck. This was expertise. Real expertise. The kind people spend years acquiring. For the first time, she began wondering what had happened during the decade they had spent apart. Later, as guests filled the fellowship hall, Claire handed Ethan a volunteer badge. Their fingers briefly touched. Neither pulled away immediately. "Would you stay for the event?" she asked. Ethan hesitated. He had planned to leave. Then he looked toward the three girls laughing near the refreshment table. "For a little while," he said. Claire smiled for the first time that evening. It was a small smile, but genuine. Then, just as she turned to greet another guest, an elderly woman approached Ethan from behind. The color drained from her face the instant she saw him. "You should not be here," she whispered. "If Claire discovers the truth about that tattoo, everything will change." The words landed like a stone in still water. Ethan turned toward the elderly woman. It was the same woman who had pulled the triplets away at the grocery store. Up close, her expression carried more fear than anger. "Margaret," Ethan said quietly, recognizing her at last. Claire's mother. Margaret glanced toward the crowded fellowship hall to make sure Claire was occupied. "You disappeared for a reason," she whispered. "Some things are better left buried." Ethan lowered his eyes for a moment. "I never buried anything." Before Margaret could respond, Claire called from across the room, asking for help near the registration tables. The older woman walked away without another word, leaving Ethan alone with questions he had carried for a decade. The fundraiser continued, but the evening no longer felt simple. Claire found herself watching Ethan whenever he was not looking. Every time a problem appeared, he somehow solved it. Every time someone needed help, he quietly stepped forward. Yet nothing about his life suggested the kind of expertise she kept witnessing. It did not add up. Near the entrance, a delivery company arrived with additional supplies. A volunteer accidentally misplaced several donation records connected to corporate sponsors. Panic spread quickly among the organizers. Those records represented thousands of dollars in pledge support. Claire immediately joined the search. So did Ethan. Within minutes, he reconstructed the entire sequence of deliveries from memory, identifying exactly where the missing paperwork had likely been placed. His reasoning was so precise that the documents were recovered from a storage cabinet less than 5 minutes later. Claire stared at him. "You remembered all of that?" Ethan shrugged. "I pay attention." It was another answer that revealed almost nothing. Yet she noticed several board members exchanging surprised looks. A man who supposedly spent his days repairing equipment should not have possessed that level of analytical detail. Later that evening, families filled folding chairs throughout the church hall. Outside, rows of pickup trucks remained parked beneath the bright security lights. Inside, Claire prepared to address donors and community leaders. Then a board member named Richard Collins arrived. Richard was successful, polished, and accustomed to being the smartest person in every room. He immediately noticed Ethan wearing a volunteer badge. Facility staff? Richard asked casually. Something like that, Ethan replied. Richard smiled politely, but the judgment behind it was obvious. Throughout the evening, he repeatedly spoke over Ethan, dismissing suggestions before hearing them. Claire noticed, so did several volunteers. Ethan never argued. He simply continued helping wherever needed. When one elderly donor became dizzy near the refreshment tables, Ethan guided him to a quiet seat, brought water, and remained with him until he recovered. No audience. No recognition. Just kindness. Claire watched the interaction from across the room. Something inside her shifted. The Ethan she remembered had always been thoughtful. The man standing before her now carried a deeper kind of strength, one built through sacrifice and responsibility. Yet Margaret's warning lingered in her mind. Why would her mother react so strongly to seeing him? As the fundraiser ended, Claire began collecting materials from the registration desk. A sealed envelope accidentally slipped from a donor packet and landed at her feet. Her name was written on the front. Beneath it were 3 words that made her heart stop. For Claire Hartwell. From Ethan. The envelope looked old. Very old. And judging by the faded postmark, it should have reached her nearly 10 years ago. Claire stared at the envelope long after the last guest had left the church hall. Around her, volunteers folded chairs and carried supplies toward waiting pickup trucks in a parking lot. The handwriting was unmistakably old. The edges were worn. The postmark was dated nearly 10 years earlier. Her hands trembled as she carefully opened it. Inside was a letter. The first line stole the air from her lungs. Claire, if you're reading this, then somehow this letter finally found its way to you. She read every word in silence. Ethan had written it shortly after their sudden separation. He explained that he had accepted responsibility for a failed engineering project involving a major technology contractor. Publicly, he had been blamed for mistakes that cost millions. Rather than fight in court and drag others into the scandal, he had stepped away. He believed the truth would eventually surface. He never mentioned sacrifice. He never asked for sympathy. Instead, most of the letter focused on Claire. He hoped she would have a good life. He hoped she would find happiness. At the bottom was a simple signature. Ethan, nothing more. Claire lowered the pages slowly. The man she remembered had disappeared without explanation. The man standing in the fellowship hall tonight had tried to explain. The letter had simply never reached her. "Mom," one of the triplets asked softly. Claire looked down and quickly wiped her eyes. Across the room, Ethan was helping stack tables before quietly preparing to leave. He had no idea she had read the letter. Outside, cold air drifted across the church parking lot. Ethan loaded tools into his pickup truck while volunteers finished cleaning up. Before he could leave, Claire approached. "Did you write me a letter?" she asked. Ethan froze. For several seconds, neither spoke. Finally, he nodded. "A long time ago. I never received it." Something painful passed through his eyes. Not anger, not bitterness, just the weight of an old disappointment he had already learned to carry. "I figured that out eventually," he said. Claire wanted answers. Hundreds of them. But another volunteer interrupted before she could continue. The next morning, Claire could not stop thinking about the letter. She began searching online archives and public records from the engineering scandal Ethan mentioned. What she found shocked her. Newspaper articles from a decade earlier described Ethan Brooks as one of the youngest lead systems engineers ever recruited by a nationally recognized infrastructure firm. Industry journals praised his innovative designs. One article even referenced a patent application connected to emergency power systems. Claire stared at the screen in disbelief. This was not a maintenance worker who happened to be smart. This was someone who had once operated at the highest levels of his profession. Yet now he spent his days repairing heating units and struggling to pay utility bills. None of it made sense. Later that afternoon, while picking up Noah after the science competition at school, Ethan noticed one student sitting alone near the school hallway. The boy's project had been disqualified after an equipment failure. Without hesitation, Ethan spent 30 minutes helping him rebuild part of the display for future competitions. The boy left smiling. Ethan never learned whether anyone noticed. Claire did. She had arrived early and witnessed the entire interaction from a distance. For the first time, the picture was beginning to change. Hidden beneath years of ordinary work was a man of remarkable skill, quiet dignity, and uncommon generosity. Yet one question remained. If Ethan had not caused a scandal, who had? That evening, as Claire continued searching old records, she discovered a familiar name attached to the original investigation. Richard Collins. Claire barely slept that night. Long after the triplets had gone to bed, she sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by printed articles, old reports, and notes from her research. The name Richard Collins appeared again and again beside the engineering project that had destroyed Ethan's career. At first, the connection seemed minor. Then the pattern became impossible to ignore. Richard had been promoted immediately after the investigation. Ethan had disappeared. Richard had gained influence. Ethan had lost everything. Yet the records never clearly explained why. By sunrise, Claire found herself thinking less about the scandal and more about the man she had seen helping children, fixing problems, and quietly carrying responsibilities that should have broken him years ago. Meanwhile, Ethan's day began like every other. He sorted mail beside the kitchen counter while Noah finished breakfast before school. Several utility bills waited near the coffee maker. One payment notice was marked overdue. Ethan folded it neatly and slipped it beneath a stack of work orders before Noah could see it. Some burdens belonged to parents alone. Outside, his pickup truck started with a familiar rumble. There was work to do. Mid-morning brought an unexpected challenge. The retirement community where Ethan often handled maintenance experienced a complete electrical control failure affecting several residential buildings. Contractors had already estimated repairs would take 3 days. Elderly residents faced possible relocation during the outage. When Ethan arrived, administrators were frustrated and overwhelmed. He spent less than 20 minutes reviewing schematics. Then he requested access to several maintenance panels and old project drawings. The staff watched in confusion. Most people could not even read the diagrams. Ethan seemed to absorb them instantly. By early afternoon, power was fully restored. 3 days of disruption had been avoided. Residents applauded when the lights returned. Ethan quietly returned borrowed tools and prepared to leave. He accepted no praise. The facility director later called the grocery store manager who had rejected Ethan's application. Word traveled quickly through small communities. People were beginning to ask questions. At a diner near the highway, Claire happened to overhear 2 retired engineers discussing the outage. "Who fixed it?" one asked. "Some maintenance guy named Ethan Brooks." The other nearly laughed. "Ethan Brooks? That Ethan Brooks?" Claire immediately turned toward them. For the next 10 minutes, she listened carefully. The men spoke about Ethan's former reputation with genuine respect. One described him as a systems engineer capable of solving problems others avoided. Another mentioned that several industry professionals had never believed the accusations surrounding the old scandal. Claire left the diner, carrying far more questions than answers. Later that afternoon, she found Ethan at Noah's school. Students and parents filled the school hallway following the science competition award ceremony. Noah proudly held a ribbon earned after his repaired project exceeded expectations. Ethan's smile was small but unmistakably proud. Claire watched from a distance before finally approaching. "You never told me who you used to be," she said. Ethan looked at Noah first, then back at Claire. "Who I used to be matters less than who I am now." The answer frustrated her because it sounded honest. Before she could press further, Noah's principal hurried toward them carrying a folder. "Mr. Brooks, I have been trying to reach you," she said. "Someone from a national engineering organization called this morning. They are looking for you." Ethan's expression changed immediately. Not fear, not excitement, recognition, as though he had been expecting this moment for years. The school hallway suddenly felt quieter. Parents continued congratulating students, lockers slammed in the distance, and children carried science projects toward waiting cars. Yet Claire's attention remained fixed on Ethan. The principal handed him a folder. "They said it was important," she explained. Ethan accepted it with a calmness that surprised everyone. Most people would have shown excitement. Ethan simply thanked her. Noah looked up at his father. "Who are they?" Ethan rested a hand on his son's shoulder. People from a long time ago. Later that afternoon, Claire found herself unable to let the moment go. By evening, she was sitting across from Ethan at a small diner near the highway, the same place where local workers often gathered after long shifts. The conversation was awkward at first. 10 years of unanswered questions filled every silence. Finally, Claire slid the folder across the table. "I know this is not my business," she said softly, "but I think you deserve to stop carrying everything alone." Ethan stared at the folder for several seconds. Then, for the first time, he opened it in front of her. Inside were documents from the National Society of Infrastructure Engineers. A formal review committee had spent years examining evidence connected to the scandal that ended his career. New findings had emerged. Several technical decisions originally blamed on Ethan had actually been approved by senior executives. Additional records suggested key information had been withheld during the original investigation. Claire slowly looked up. "You were telling the truth." Ethan gave a small nod. "I always was." There was no triumph in his voice. No viternis, just quiet fact. Through the diner window, pickup trucks rolled through the parking lot beneath fading evening light. Claire suddenly understood why he never defended himself aggressively. He had spent years choosing dignity over public warfare. Yet one question remained. "Why did you walk away?" she asked. Ethan leaned back and looked toward the window. "Because people were depending on me." He explained that Noah had lost his mother shortly after the scandal unfolded. Raising a grieving child had become more important than rebuilding a professional reputation. Legal battles would have consumed years. Noah needed a father more than Ethan needed recognition. Claire felt her chest tighten. Every discovery seemed to reveal another layer of sacrifice she had never seen. The next morning brought another unexpected development. News of the engineering review had quietly spread through professional circles. Ethan arrived at the retirement community to find several administrators waiting for him. One introduced a consultant overseeing major facility upgrades. Their planned modernization project had stalled for months because no one could solve a recurring systems issue. Ethan agreed to take a quick look. What was supposed to be a brief inspection turned into a remarkable demonstration. He identified design flaws, proposed solutions, and sketched modifications on a legal pad within 30 minutes. The consultant stared at the drawings. "Do you realize this could save hundreds of thousands of dollars?" Ethan simply handed back the pen. "It should work." By afternoon, word had spread even further. People who once saw only a maintenance worker were beginning to see something else. Yet not everyone welcomed the change. Richard Collins certainly did not. That evening, Claire returned home and found Margaret waiting in the kitchen. Her mother's face carried visible concern. "You need to stop digging," Margaret warned. "Richard has too much to lose." Claire frowned. "What are you not telling me?" Margaret hesitated. Then she revealed something that changed everything. 10 years ago, the missing letter had never been lost in the mail. Someone had taken it before Claire could read it, and Margaret knew exactly who had done it. Claire could hardly believe what she was hearing. Her mother sat quietly at the kitchen table while the triplets slept upstairs. The house felt unusually still. "Richard intercepted the letter," Margaret finally admitted. "He told me Ethan had moved on. He said giving you that letter would only cause more pain." Claire stared at her in disbelief. "And you believed him?" Margaret lowered her eyes. "I wanted to." The answer hurt almost as much as the truth itself. For years, Claire had blamed Ethan for disappearing. For years, Ethan had carried the consequences of a silence he never created. The next morning, Claire drove directly to Ethan's house. She found him outside near the mailbox, loading equipment into his pickup truck before work. Utility bills remained tucked beneath his arm alongside maintenance schedules and school paperwork. The ordinary details of his life suddenly felt extraordinary to her. This was a man who had lost almost everything and still showed up every day for his son. Before Claire could explain what she had learned, Ethan's phone rang. The call changed everything. Noah's school informed him that a complaint had been filed regarding Ethan's recent involvement with student projects and facility repairs. Someone claimed he had been presenting himself as an engineer despite lacking current credentials. Pending review, the The school requested that he avoid participating in future student activities. Ethan listened quietly. "I understand," he said. He never argued. He never defended himself. But when the call ended, Claire saw genuine pain in his eyes. Helping Noah and the other students had never been about recognition. It had been about being present. Now even that was being questioned. By lunchtime, rumors had spread further than either of them expected. At the grocery store where Ethan had once applied for the supervisor position, employees whispered about the old scandal. Some remembered only the accusations, not the recent discoveries. Others assumed the engineering review meant Ethan had hidden something worse. Years of misunderstanding were suddenly returning all at once. Richard Collins had been busy. That evening, Noah came home unusually quiet. They sat together at the kitchen table while unfinished homework rested between them. "Some kids heard things today," Noah admitted. "They said maybe you really did something wrong." The words landed harder than any professional setback. Ethan looked at his son for a long moment. Then he placed a hand on Noah's shoulder. "People do not always know the whole story." Noah nodded, but the uncertainty remained. For the first time, Ethan feared losing something far more important than a career. He feared losing his son's confidence. The following day brought another blow. The National Engineering Organization contacted Ethan again. New evidence supporting his case had surfaced, but a final review hearing was scheduled immediately. Richard Collins had already submitted a formal response challenging the findings. If the committee accepted Richard's version of events, Ethan's name might remain permanently stained despite everything that had been uncovered. Claire accompanied Ethan to the meeting location, a large conference center near a hospital waiting room complex used by several professional organizations. During the drive, neither spoke much. The weight of years seemed to fill the silence. As they arrived, Ethan noticed a nervous young maintenance worker struggling with a disabled veteran whose wheelchair had become stuck near the entrance. Without hesitation, Ethan stepped out, fixed the mechanical issue, and helped the man safely inside. Even on the worst day of his life, he still chose kindness first. Claire watched quietly. Her respect for him had become something deeper now. Yet respect alone could not save him. As they entered the building, a committee representative hurried toward them carrying a sealed evidence box. "Mr. Brooks," she said, "a document was delivered this morning. It was never included in the original investigation." Ethan frowned. "What document?" The woman looked down at the label. Then her eyes widened. "According to the records, it is the original project authorization signed 10 years ago." The committee representative carefully placed the evidence box on a long conference table. Through the glass walls of the meeting center, Ethan could see people moving between offices and the nearby hospital waiting room corridor. Everything felt strangely ordinary for a moment that might change the course of his life. Claire stood beside him. Richard Collins sat across the room with several attorneys and consultants. His confidence remained intact, at least for now. The committee chair opened the box and removed a sealed folder that had somehow never been included in the original investigation. The room grew quiet as copies were distributed. Ethan immediately recognized the document. It was the original authorization package for the infrastructure project that had destroyed his career. The signatures were clear. The dates were clear. The chain of approvals was clear. And for the first time in 10 years, the truth was clear. The committee members reviewed the pages in silence. Several exchanged surprised glances. One flipped directly to a section containing engineering risk assessments. Ethan had warned leadership about the exact failures that later occurred. His concerns had been documented. His recommendations had been documented. His objections had been documented. Every warning he had given was sitting on paper in black and white. The room became noticeably still. Then another discovery emerged. Attached to the authorization package was an internal memorandum identifying who approved the decision to ignore Ethan's recommendations. Richard Collins. No one spoke for several seconds. The silence felt almost physical. Richard's expression changed first. The confidence disappeared. The explanation stopped. The committee chair slowly removed his glasses and looked across the table. "Mr. Brooks was correct," he said quietly. From the beginning, the room went silent. 10 years of assumptions collapsed in a single sentence. Claire felt tears gathering before she could stop them. She looked toward Ethan. He was not celebrating. He was not angry. He simply sat there with the same quiet dignity he had carried through every hardship. One committee member shook his head. "You accepted blame for decisions you did not make." Ethan nodded. There were families involved. Employees. Lawsuits would have dragged everyone through years of conflict. "Including yourself," another member replied. Ethan offered a small smile. "My son needed me more than I needed a title." The silence returned. This time it felt different. It felt like respect. Later that afternoon, the committee formally cleared Ethan's name and restored his professional standing. Several organizations immediately expressed interest in working with him again. Yet the moment that mattered most happened outside the building. Noah had been waiting with a school counselor who drove him there after hearing the news. The boy ran across the parking lot the moment he saw his father. "I knew it," Noah said, throwing his arms around him. "I knew you were telling the truth." Ethan held his son tightly. For a second, the years seemed to fall away. Not the hardship, not the sacrifice, just the loneliness of carrying it alone. A week later, the community fundraiser held a special appreciation event at the same church where everything had begun. Families filled the fellowship hall. Pickup trucks lined the parking lot. Children ran between tables decorated with photographs from local programs. Claire stood near the stage with the triplets. Margaret sat quietly in the front row, humbled by truth she could no longer deny. When Ethan's name was announced, the applause lasted far longer than he expected. The grocery store manager who had rejected him approached afterward and offered a sincere apology. The retirement community director publicly thanked him for helping residents. Teachers from Noah's school spoke about his generosity. None of them praised only his intelligence. They praised his character. That was what people remember most. As the evening ended, Claire found Ethan outside beneath the church lights. The triplets were laughing nearby, while Noah helped stack chairs with volunteers. "You never stopped being the man I remembered," Claire said softly. Ethan looked toward the children. "Life just gave me different responsibilities." Claire smiled. "And you carried them well." For a moment, neither said anything. They simply stood together watching the people they cared about. The same tattoo rested on both their wrists, no longer a mystery, but a reminder. Some truths take years to surface. Some second chances arrive quietly. And sometimes the strongest people are not the ones who fight hardest to be seen. They're the ones who keep choosing integrity when no one is watching. As families drifted toward their cars and the church lights glowed against the evening sky, Ethan looked at Noah, laughing with the triplets, and felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Peace. Not because his name had been restored, not because the world finally understood, but because dignity had survived every misunderstanding. Respect had followed character, and grace, patient and steady, had finally brought everyone home.